Hi, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Numbers. This is the show that goes beyond the data to explore the people, the stories, and the insights that drive business success. My name is Dave Bookbinder, and I am known as a business valuation expert and best-selling author. Thank you for joining me today. Today, I am pleased to welcome a serial entrepreneur whose mission is to help leaders build great companies. He is the co-founder of Rhythm Systems. He's a best-selling author of Rhythm, How to Achieve Breakthrough Execution and Accelerate Growth. And he's here today to talk to us about high growth leadership and his new book, The Journey to CEO Success. I'm pleased to welcome Patrick Thean. Patrick, welcome to Behind the Numbers.
Hey, Dave, thank you so much for having me on your show. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine. I gave you a very brief introduction here. There's so much more to your backstory, but if you can keep it on the shorter side, tell the audience the rest of the story about who you are and what you do.
Sure, the quick version is, I started my career at Oracle, and then I started a software company in the 90s and ran it for about 7 years and had a good exit. We were number 151 of the Inc. 500 in those days, so we were fast growth. From the outside looking in, we were very successful, but from the inside looking out, we were running from one crisis to another. And we survived, and we survived, and we survived, and suddenly we were deemed successful by the world and had a good exit. And over the years, I've realized that a lot of, whether you're a founder or CEO, someone that runs a company, they had a lot of the same challenges as me. And what I realized was that execution or lack thereof is what causes companies or CEOs to fail. And I think the success rate is very low, actually. If you think about guys and gals that do this job of running companies, it's very low success rate. And so I've dedicated the last, I don't know, I guess 24 years of my life to really solving that problem, really answering that question of, why does a company or a company leader not succeed, and how to actually counter that and give a CEO the best possible chance of success. So that's what I do today. That's my calling. That's what my books are all about. And that's what I've kind of dedicated myself to answering that question. How do you succeed and not fail?
That's a great story. And we're going to be talking a lot about the principles that are contained in the book, The Journey to CEO Success, 7 Practices for High Growth Leadership. But just for the audience out there, it doesn't matter if you're a CEO or not. If you're talking about leadership, these principles and the concepts we're going to be talking about here today are going to be relevant to you. But before we jump in any further, Patrick, just tell the audience a little bit about the book. What inspired you to write it?
So, right here in Charlotte, North Carolina, my first customer, I'm still serving him. His name is Michael Prager. Michael's run a very successful company. I helped him start it, 24 years ago. And today he's still my client. Today, Avid Exchange is about to go private again. They went through a journey of startup to unicorn valuation to an IPO. Now they're going to be taken private again. And so Michael and I were talking one day, and he said, Patrick, it'd be great if we could just package, kind of curate all the things that we've done together, and help other CEOs succeed. And I said, Michael, that's exactly what I would love to do. And so we curated some of the best practices from himself, from all the coaching I've done over the last 20 some years. And I've got very long relationships with the CEOs I coach. I coach very few of them, but I have very long relationships, 7 years, 8 years, 10 years. And that's where this came from, was a desire to really help CEOs. And I'll share with you, at the end of the day, these 7 practices help a CEO understand that they will get a lot further and go a lot further and be more successful with their team versus by themselves. And I think a lot of times, folks who are very capable and competent tend to rely a little bit too much on themselves. And I find that pattern in a lot of CEOs who, maybe they got from here to the first or second stage by relying on a lot of their skills, but then to get to the next stage, they've got to rely on other people. And so that sounds really simple, but it's not that simple. So there's 7 key practices that help the CEO, company leader, be successful through all phases of their journey.
Gotcha. And we're going to have a conversation that probably will unpack each of those principles. But Patrick, sort of keep a mental scorecard in your head if, as we're getting close to the end, if we haven't touched on something, I want to make sure you get a chance to call those out. But you mentioned you've worked with visionary leaders for quite some time. Have you determined, can you tell what the biggest differences are between the leaders who succeed and the ones who are struggling?
Yeah. So I would say that I think one is they got to be optimistic. When you've heard the phrase, what is it? Turn lemons into lemonade, right?
Yeah.
And I think that anybody in life is always going to be get ups and downs. And I think successful leaders figure out how to be positive, how to genuinely see potential upside, even in the darkest hours. I think that really, really helps. And then, I think, if we get into these practices, my first two practices are about working on yourself. In general, I believe that you have to work on yourself. Otherwise, you don't have the right to work on others, frankly. So the CEOs out there who are too focused on what you're doing wrong, but don't think about what part of the movie they play in somebody else not doing right, won't get that far. So I would say you got to really be willing to work on yourself. And I think that leaders who are willing to work on themselves, they'll go very far, because if you work on yourself hard, you just get better and stronger, right? And if you don't, then the world passes you by. So when you're leading a company with more people, you got to do that in spades. You got to do that well. You got to do that consistently, and you've got to stay ahead of the game. How do you stay ahead of the game? You've got to work on yourself. So that's the first part. I would say that's the most
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, and we talk about the optimistic lens, that's so important, and it's important for all of us in everyday living. Changing that little mindset shift from why is this happening to me to why is it happening for me, looking for the
Yes.
lessons, looking for the opportunities, that takes quite a bit of discipline and self-awareness.
Yes, very much so. So, the first two practices, seven practices, right? The first two practices is really about working on yourself. And the first one is being curious. And the second one is leveling up your skills. They kind of go hand in hand. I find that a lot of leaders ask me to help them be better listeners. And I came to the conclusion a while ago that yes, you can do all the things, like have the checklist, right? Being a better listener, maintain eye contact, don't go look at another screen, don't be checking your email in the meeting, and all those kind of things. But the truth is, if you could find yourself to be just a little bit more curious about what we're talking about, I don't have to teach you how to listen. I mean, think about the last time you were interested or curious in something. No one had to tell you, Dave, you need to learn how to listen about fill in the blanks. You're like, dude, that's what are you talking about? When I get to that topic, I'm just in the zone. I'm all in. A lot of it is this curiosity factor. I think that you've got to first. Some of us do that naturally, and if you're blessed that way, that's awesome. But if you're not blessed that way, it can be trained. And one of the questions that I always ask is, what do I not yet know about fill in the blanks? So when I come to your podcast, for example, I'm going to research you, right? I can do it just because I'm on your podcast, or I can do it with true curiosity and say, what don't I yet know about Dave? And then it sparks an interest in me to go find out, like, what don't I know yet about Dave? And I found that this really helps me with relationships, not just work, but at home. So I think, what happens at work spills into life. What happens at life spills into work. And so I've been married 35 years, and I do ask myself, like, what is it that I don't yet know about my wife? And I've been married 35 years, but that actually helps me to remember, like, not to take her for granted, not to just, assume I know everything about her, not to assume that when she says something, the next day, the next phase is going to be exactly the same. Anyway, so that question of what do I not yet know about, that topic, that person, very helpful.
Yeah, and that's great advice too for anybody who's out there listening and is going to a networking meeting. Just jumping on the LinkedIn profile, checking a website, and getting familiar with who the individual is that you're going to meet is going to really make a difference, not only in terms of the quality of the conversation, but it's going to probably set you apart from many of the other people that the individual's meeting with, because not everybody takes the time to do that preparation. Patrick, one of the other things that you talk about besides curiosity is the importance of humility. And a lot of times when people get into roles of leadership and responsibility, especially all the way up the org chart, maybe they're recognized because they're bold and brazen, and humility maybe has left the room. How do we
Yes.
ensure that we maintain that humility or cultivate it again?
Yeah, I think first of all, if we understand that that's necessary, that's the first step. right? If we understand that's necessary, I think that younger leaders also, and I think about myself when I was a much younger leader, we have the wrong impression, some of us do anyway, I did, that we have to be the smartest guy in the room. Um, and we think in the beginning of my career, I thought like I had to really I had to really show that I'm worth something, right? And so that kind of causes, and if you have a dominant personality like I do, that really helps push out humility. So I would say, first of all, that most of us need to learn how to grasp two competing ideas. So, for example, you want to be ambitious, but you want to be humble. And sometimes we automatically think, well, if I'm super ambitious, then I got to be egotistical, I got to be this, I got to be that. Or if I'm super humble, then I don't know that I could be ambitious. Actually, you can be both. In fact, I think a lot of us don't realize how often we have to extract the best of A and the best of B and create what I call A and B versus A or B, right? Stuff like, hey, that manager holds people accountable. Well, he's probably a jerk. Not necessarily. Why do we automatically think that when somebody holds us accountable, they got to be a jerk? Or sometimes some people think, well, if I'm gonna be hold you accountable, I gotta be firm. I gotta be tough. I gotta no. Why can't you help somebody hold them accountable and be gentle? You can. So this is I think the world. Our minds go into these typical patterns, and we think, oh, it's gonna be A or B, when actually it should be A and B. So humility is the question you asked, though. I think humility is a cornerstone of being willing to learn, being willing to listen, um, and not getting ahead of ourselves. So I think, one thing about Michael Prager that amazes me after 25 years being a public company CEO, whenever somebody shares something feedback with Michael, which I think is the hardest thing to receive, he had a board meeting years ago. He came out in a coaching session, and he was, and I know that was a very tough board meeting, and they really beat him up. And I asked him, I said, Michael, you okay? He surprised me. He said, yeah, Patrick, I'm perfectly fine. I said, no, no, no. It's me, buddy. Like, you can tell me what's going on in your heart and your mind. I mean, you got to be hurt somewhere, right? I mean, it was a tough board meeting. I was there. He was like, no, no, no. He said, those guys took the trouble telling me what I was doing wrong and what I needed to improve. And so, as long as I know what I need to improve, I go start working on it right now. In fact, I should just say thank you, because it takes energy, and those guys take a risk when they tell me what they think I did wrong or how I have to improve. And that is, I think, one of his superpowers that have led him go through his journey and his growth process, right? From because you have very few companies, right, that have a starter founder CEO that can take them all the way to an IPO and beyond. Avid Exchange has been a public company for 4+ years now. They're going to become a private company again, but Michael's led them all this time, and they've done well. So it's hard to see cases where a founder has the skills to go all the way and actually maintain success post IPO as a public company. And the truth is, no founder had that skill in the beginning. Nobody did. Like, Michael didn't have all these skills 24 years ago. But the only way, one of the few things that he did that allowed him to get to this place is his great humility matched to his great ambition. Very ambitious guy, but very humble and very willing to say, look, I got to get better. I got to get better. And if you
Yeah.
took the time to tell me something about myself, first thing I should say is thank you, Dave, for sharing that about me so I can get.
Yeah, I like the idea that they're not mutually exclusive, that you can be both humble and ambitious at the same time. And the other thing I just want to comment on is, because I think people can take away, if they're going through a performance appraisal, when receiving feedback that can be perceived as negative or criticism, as you outlined here with Michael, if you take it in the context again of what's in it for me, how can I improve myself and not get insulted by it, you can really take that and use it to your advantage. So, one of the other things that you talk about for leaders is to understand emerging problems early. Are there any
Yes.
particular warning signs that people should look for, and how to respond?
Yeah. So thank you. You take me through this journey and automatically hitting the various seven key practices, right? We talk about curiosity and leveling up. Those are the first two. The next two are really about, I think of this as being faithful to what you've been given. In other words, as a company grows, your sphere of influence grows and your responsibilities grow, your opportunities grow as well, but your responsibilities grow. So I view it from a responsibility standpoint that you should take good care of what you already have been given so that you can be given more. So you can be given more. And so the next two practices are about execution, which to me is about doing well with what you've been given. The number three is what I call establish your early warning system. And so what I found is that CEOs who succeed have the ability to see what's coming just a little bit ahead of the time when it hits them. So in other words, the best way to avoid a freight train if you can see the freight train. Otherwise, you get smacked on the side of the head. Leading indicators. And by the way, a lot of people think that we can just create leading indicators to measure things and then just set and repeat it. But that's not true. I find that your results indicators, yes, these are the typical things you want to get, right? Whatever business you're in, these are the key results indicators you need to achieve. But leading indicators change based on where the company is, based on the challenges ahead of us. So I like to always help leaders maintain and review a key list of just a few leading indicators so that they can actually have a peek into the future just a little bit to see what's about to happen before it smacks them on the side of the head. I think avoiding that train wreck, so what I call, fire prevention, is much better than firefighting. So if you're doing a lot of firefighting, that means you need to go review your leading indicators so that you can do fire prevention. By the way, firefighting is very expensive. You may survive it. I've survived many fires, but they all cost you something. They all cost you that opportunity. They cost you that great employee who walked out the door because he's exhausted and tired of dealing with your BS. So firefighting really is expensive, and sometimes we don't really see that. And then the fourth practice here is about achieving full alignment. As your company grows, your team grows, and most of us don't know how to get full alignment with our team members. Now, it's not that hard when you have 4 or 5 people. It gets harder when you have 10, 20 people, but it gets really hard when you get north of about 100 people, where full alignment to me means that we all understand and are aligned, not just top down, but left and right. We all understand that currently things are moving so fast that a lot of the opportunities we deal with, they're really enterprise level opportunities, which means when I tackle a project, I might have to really be aware of what my colleague is doing in the other room, in the other aisle. Otherwise, we're not helping each other. And worse, we may be stepping on each other. I had a CEO share with me that she was disappointed because one of her projects didn't get delivered to a customer. And well, that happens all the time. So let's avoid that. Let's figure that out. She said, yeah, but Patrick, this was really bad because it was supposed to be done in Q1, but didn't get done to Q4. And I said, oh, that's bad. Let's fix that. And she said, yeah, but that's not the worst part of the story. She said, the worst part of the story is that I didn't even find out about it till Q4. So this is from a lack of alignment. Everyone's busy. So this is not about working harder. And I don't even want to say working smarter because working smarter is a bit too generic. I would say this is about working in alignment, understanding how we have a web of work here. Your work affects somebody else, and you want to really understand that. And so too often I see leaders as they move up in their career. Again, this is a bit of self-reliance, too self-reliant on themselves. And little things like, I'm used to this tool and I'm going to recreate this tool when I get my new job. But those tools were already created for you by somebody else. Check that out before you go spend the time and energy to go create some of the tools that you want. I see that happening in a lot of companies where some people create the same tools just because they didn't know somebody else in the company was doing that. And so that's a lot of waste. And that's not being faithful with the resources that were given to you.
Yeah, I want to move into a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and that's culture, because I write and speak about the impact that culture has on a business enterprise value. And there's the
Yes.
connecting of the dots between leadership all the way through increasing valuation. No doubt, culture has been discussed as a significant factor in company successes. What can leaders do to make their company culture really a competitive weapon, Patrick?
Yeah, so that's number 5, right? Practice number 5 of culture. And the reason why that's really important is because over the last few years, especially with COVID, and also just the way the world has moved. I think employees today have a real choice, especially in the United States. I mean, great opportunities here. So over time, in the last 10 years, I think we went from like an employer's market to an employee's market in some ways. And this now shifts back and forth, right? Sometimes the job market is really hot, sometimes it's not hot. So sometimes the employers have a little bit more power, sometimes the employees have a little bit more power. But this is very different. In other words, if you go back 20 years, I would say we didn't have this dynamic where culture, or rather employees leaving, retention, like employee retention, is a key discussion I have in almost every single company I visit now. Whereas you go back 20 years, people didn't spend that much time thinking about employee retention. But now employees are voting with their legs, voting with choices, and they're choosing to go where their hearts are. So I think that to make culture your competitive advantage, first you've got to be really clear on what it is. You've got to be willing to allow your culture to help people choose you or not choose you. So in other words, when somebody visits my firm, they should learn about what my firm's like. They should see what our culture, our working culture, and our core values, our mindsets, what is that like? Because if they don't enjoy that, then we should not recruit them. So that's a mindset shift, where a lot of people still do this. A lot of people still recruiting based on skill set versus based on fit. And if you think of your company like a family, and you get the wrong person joining your family, it's just not a good fit. Now, I think CEOs have to first really believe that. If you don't believe that, then it doesn't work. But if you really believe that, then you're not afraid anymore of people saying, "Well, I don't really want to join your company because of certain practices you do. I don't really like those things." Okay, that's fine. That's okay. Not for you. So I think it's a mindset shift where we got to be willing to say, yeah, okay, this is not for you. When you can do that, then you can really build a culture where people would enjoy the place. And then, oh, by the way, you still have to pay people fairly. I want to say that you have to pay people fairly, and market rates, etc. But if you do this right, then money is not the reason why people join you. Again, you got to table stakes. You got to pay people fairly. But once you've done that, people will join you because of your culture. So when you can achieve that, now it's a competitive advantage because of the war for talent in the marketplace.
Yeah, I want to have a tough conversation here on culture because I work with a lot of clients and they have all their values pasted on their walls. And I'm told by a number of people that the words are BS, that they're not living what they're saying on the walls. In other words, the guy on the eighth floor didn't get the memo, so to speak. Somebody once said on this program, maybe more than once, that culture is what you tolerate. How do we ensure that when we put these values on the wall, that everyone is adhering to them?
I think it begins at the very first part. Before you put them on the wall, how did you discover them? I use the word discover because unless you're a new company, you don't get the opportunity to decide like these are the 5 key culture points I want. If you're an existing company that haven't done this yet, there are very few now that haven't done this yet. You really have to discover what your culture is. It's almost like if you didn't pay attention to your child, and your child's now 12 years old, they already have their personality. Actually, by 6 or 7, they already have their personality. It is too late for you to say, I don't like that you do this. I want you to be this way. Now, learn new skills and tools, of course, but I use the word be. If you want your child to be different, it's too late. Like they've already developed their personality and how they look at certain things. So you want to discover more than you want to insist. And I think after you've discovered what your true values are in the company, you want to then be able to accentuate the ones that you really want to grow into further. And then you just want to reward that kind of behavior, or keep talking about that kind of behavior, keep thanking people for that kind of behavior. And it's not an overnight thing. It's a process. Unfortunately, it's not a magic wand deal. It's a process.
Yeah, definitely. But you've got to be committed to it. You've got to be intentional about it, and you really have to
Yes.
enforce it.
Yeah. By the way,
Patrick,
I made
so
that same mistake. I made that same mistake. I think when I was before I started my companies, I was a consultant, and I went to this company. Herc Celanese Corporation. They don't really exist anymore. They kind of split up. They sold Celanese, but this is back in the 90s. And I walked in and I saw the values on the wall. They were beautiful. And I was in my 20s, very impressionable, didn't know very much, early 20s actually. And I said to my customer, I said, wow, these are wonderful values. Like, I kind of want to cry. Like, I really want to work for you guys. And she shocked me because she said, Patrick, that's just a poster on the wall. It means nothing to us. Right. And that was damaging because what happened to me when I saw that is my brain made the wrong decision. My brain said, core values is just BS, stupid. Like, why the heck would you put that on the wall? So in my first company, I actually did not put anything on the wall. In fact, anytime somebody suggested that, I said, heck no. Heck no. I'm not gonna put that stupid thing on the wall. Like, live it, man, live it. And that was, like I said, early days where the thinking is A or B, right? You can't put things on the wall because I learned that means you're not going to follow it. Well, that's not true. That's not true. You got to put it on the wall and you got to live it. But somehow, because I had a negative experience, I began to think that you should not put it on the wall. So I share that story because I think a lot of us make that mistake. We have one negative experience and we dismiss that whole thing from then on. It took me years before I came back and realized that was a mistake. Like, yes, they had the values on the wall, and no, they didn't live it. But that doesn't mean it was bad to have it on the wall. It meant it was bad that they didn't live it. So
Yeah, and
it took
there
me
you
to
are using your own
figure that out.
principle to see the positive in that. You're making lemonade out of the lemons. I had a very similar situation, and it was kind of a triggering point for me that ultimately led me to get inspired to start the process that became my first book and dropping the first article that led to the series. Went to visit with a client, and I was a single dad at the time, and I really needed flexibility in my schedule to manage everything that I had in my life. Saw the poster in the foyer while I was waiting for the CFO, and it espoused all their values, all the things they valued, all the things they appreciated, including flexibility. And on the way back to her office, I said something very similar. Wow, this must be a great place to work. I'd love to be here. This is so cool. She shuts the door and she literally said to me, that's just bullshit. They say it, but they don't do it. And that's really sad. Patrick, I know we're getting close to the end here. And if you can stick around for just a couple more minutes, I want to make sure that in the course of this conversation that we did hit on most of, not all of the principles, or is there any that I overlooked that you want to
Yeah,
share?
so I would say to finish the swing on culture, right? My sixth practice, the fifth practice was making culture your competitive advantage. The sixth practice is about building a strong people ecosystem. But you do have to first have that culture. Then you can build the strong people ecosystem. And I think oftentimes we don't think enough about the people around us. I don't just mean the employees around you. I think an ecosystem is built of your employees, your suppliers, your customers, your shareholders, your investors. And I've seen so many companies where when they had the wrong customer, it really killed them, right? Like, you could get a really tough customer that just sucks all the resources of your company, and you're not profitable because of that tough customer. And sometimes it's a tough customer because you didn't have the right products that's to serve them. So your people ecosystem, very, very important. Well, your culture gives you a competitive advantage. Then you use it to build strong ecosystem. And then the final, number seven, the final practice is to serve and build all your stuff for the right customer. And I call that your core customer. And I think that too often people build products and services for anybody that walks in the door. And really, the best companies that can go the distance and can get large, it's more scalable. Scalability is really critical if you want to build a business that's worth something. So to do that, you really have to build all your strategies around what I call the core customer. And that is the right type of person for you to serve. And so very few people do that. So that's practice number seven. So to sum it up, seven key practices, first work on yourself, be curious, level up. Then be faithful of what you've been given. So establish your early warning system and get full alignment with your teams. And then make sure you provided the right environment for your team to succeed. So that's making culture your competitive advantage and building a strong people ecosystem. And then with all that, then strategy. Number seven is strategy, which is to build all your stuff around the right core customer. So that's a quick summary of the seven that we talked about today.
Thank you. Glad we covered most of them. I'm going to give you the final word here before we wrap up and let you share, either highlight some typical mistakes that people should be looking out for or just some other advice in closing.
I think in closing, I'd love for everyone to, I go back to my very first thing, which is that it's really interesting for leaders to succeed. You got to be strong, right? And so you got to find a place for yourself where you can be ambitious, you can be firm, you can be tough, and you can be loving, and you can be curious, and you can continue to be humble to learn. So I think having that balance of knowing the difference between humility and learning and ambition, those are two separate things, and you can hold both of those concepts together. I think that's critical for success. And I wish everyone great success. And you can find the book on Amazon easily. So
That's
thank you.
excellent. Tell people how they can find you, how they can connect with you, and again, where they can find your books.
Yeah, so my book's on Amazon, and you can come to my website, rhythmsystems.com. And if you want to learn more about me specifically, when you come to rhythmsystems.com, there'll be a tab up there with my name on it. And my fans tend to go there first. And we've also got a podcast, and the podcast is called The CEO Journey to Success, same as the name of the book, right? So the podcast comes out every week, and I'd love for you guys to go check out my podcast and learn more about this.
Yep, lots of good stuff there. Thank you so much for joining us today, Patrick, and for sharing all your wisdom with us.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
Pleasure. And thank you out there for tuning into Behind the Numbers. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment, leave us a review on Spotify or Apple. That stuff really does move the needle. And don't forget to crush that subscribe button so that you don't miss an episode. Next one that I'm going to drop is going to be a special episode. More on that when I meet with you next time. And until then, I'm Dave Bookbinder reminding you that the numbers tell the story, but the people bring it to life. Take care, everybody.